Republicans in both chambers of Congress are fighting tooth and nail to kill a bipartisan bill which would, among other things, reduce child poverty because they think it's too communist and also because they think it would benefit President Biden in an election year. This is the 5 millionth reason why you should never, ever, ever vote Republican, and we've got to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video. I want to start here with Colin Allred, who is a Democratic congressman from Texas, and he's actually running against Ted Cruz for Texas's Senate seat, and hopefully he will win because, by God, we need to get rid of Ted Cruz. But this is a brief summary of what this bill would do shortly before they voted on it.
Hey everybody, Congressman Colin Allred here with big news. We're expanding and extending the child tax credit, helping 16 million families make life just a little bit easier. You know, as the son of a single mom who's a public school teacher, I know how important putting money back in your pocket is, and that's what the child tax credit does. That's also a win for our businesses and for affordable housing. It's a win across the board, and it's a bipartisan one, and that's my commitment to you. But I'll always work with anybody to help you and your family get ahead.
Yeah, please, for the love of God, if you're an eligible voter living in Texas, please vote for Colin Allred. By the way, Ted Cruz, as a sidebar, you know, not only is he a terrible senator, he quite frankly isn't interested in being in the Senate. If you watch this guy's interviews or if you take a look at his Twitter feed, and brace yourselves if you do, he's constantly talking about his latest book or his podcast, right? So help Ted Cruz out, help this part-time senator become a full-time podcaster and vote in Colin Allred. Okay, that aside, that is the bill in a nutshell. It's expanding, beefing up the child tax credit, which is currently anemic thanks to Republicans. We'll get to that in a second. And it would also help lower income families as well with respect to renting property, right? Now, they voted on this and it passed. It actually passed this House of Representatives, which is shocking given how gloriously incompetent it is, thanks to Republicans. As Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell points out, Hakeem Jeffries is effectively the Speaker of the House. Every major piece of legislation this Congress, today expanding the child tax credit, has passed with more Democratic votes than GOP votes. That's hashtag people over politics. It's a $79 billion business and family tax benefits package, and more Democrats voted for it than Republicans, even though Republicans are in the majority. But it passed. Now it has to go to the Senate. We'll address that as well because there's also a sticking point there. But to really focus in on what this does, according to the legislation itself, most of the child tax credit enhancements would benefit lower income families who'd be able to claim more of the credit. And it's laddered. The credit would be adjusted for inflation starting in 2024, which is expected to bump up the maximum credit to $2,100 per child in 2025, up from the current $2,000. It's laddered. So it's like, I think it's $1,800 for 2023, $1,900 for 2024, $2,000 in 2025, and I guess if you bump it up for inflation, $2,100, right? This is good. This is important because it will help struggling families, millions of children. And yet, a lot of Republicans, like Republican Congressman Chip Roy, ranted about it and opposed it and tried to whip votes against it. He is a member of the far-right element of the House Republican Conference, and his reason is kind of gross.
But unfortunately, as happens in this town, this legislation comes with provisions that, frankly, the people I represent are tired of. And it's provisions that would continue to expand the welfare state, as the Wall Street Journal editorialized about, by expanding the child tax credit in ways that will continue to fund people directly through refundable credits, which we find to be problematic.
Why? And who cares? Child poverty has effectively doubled over the last couple of years because Republicans allowed, 50 Senate Republicans and 1 Democrat, Joe Manchin, allowed President Biden's COVID-era enhanced child tax credit to expire. Why do you care? But it goes back to the thing. It's basically too communist for them as far as they're concerned. It expands the welfare state. Well, people need welfare in this country, right? Child poverty is disturbingly high for a nation this advanced and this wealthy. I will remind you as well that Chip Roy is the guy who famously ranted just a couple of months ago that Republicans have nothing to campaign on. Do you all remember this?
One thing. I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, that I can go campaign on and say we did. One.
I guess you can go back and tell your constituents, hey, I had an opportunity to vote in favor of reducing child poverty across this country, including in Texas, where, believe it or not, child poverty exists. But I voted against it because really it expands the welfare state and it's too communist, and we got to stick it to these commie Marxist socialist Democrats. Super gross. But the grossness doesn't just stop at the House, right? Again, we have to fight for it in the Senate. And the Senate, at least many Republicans, aren't particularly inclined to take up the legislation to vote for it because of political reasons. Chuck Grassley, the ancient senator from Iowa, and when I say ancient, this guy is older than President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump. I mean, he's in his 90s, and he is one of the weirdest hypocrites in the Republican conference in the Senate, because at times he's been willing to work with the president seemingly in good faith, and then at other times he takes ridiculous positions like this. And this is what he told reporters. Passing a tax bill that makes the president look good, mailing out checks before the election, remember that, means he could be reelected, and then we won't extend the 2017 tax cuts. And he's, of course, referring to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed by Donald Trump, the vast majority of the benefits of which went to elites and the upper class and added $2 trillion to the debt, the very debt that Donald Trump swore that not only would he not contribute to, he would just wipe all of it out, all of our national debt. He swore he would take care of it. Our debt would be $0 by the time he was done with his presidency. And then, of course, he added more in a 4-year term than any president in modern history, $8 trillion. But that is Chuck Grassley's logic. This bill, which would reduce child poverty, would make the President Biden, look good because it would allow him to mail out checks before an election. And if that happens, then we can't cut taxes for super rich people who don't need tax cuts. That's their logic. Super cynical, super gross. Now, before I play or show you where the whole mailing out checks before an election, because your memory is probably starting to trigger like, wow, that sounds familiar. I just want to remind you, child poverty is an issue everywhere in the United States, okay? Every state struggles with child poverty. But if you look at the data, you know what one thing that the data consistently shows, like the states that struggle the most with child poverty per capita? They're red states for the most part. Mississippi, Louisiana, West Virginia, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, South Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, the only quote-unquote blue state which cracks the top 10 is New Mexico. That's where we are. So these people are blocking legislation which would help not just blue states, which honestly is reason enough to do it because you're supposed to try to help the entire country, not just red states, but it would meaningfully help the most red states. But they don't care. They do not care. I want to play another clip too. This is to put it in perspective because I mentioned that child poverty effectively doubled over the last year or so because of President Biden's expired enhanced child tax credit, right? It cut child poverty in half. Republicans, all 50 Senate Republicans and one Democrat, let it expire. And this is how the Fox propaganda network pitched it when the data came back to show that child poverty effectively doubled because of 50 Republicans and one Democrat. This is how they pitched it.
And from under 8 to more than 12%, the child poverty rate, and this is one that really jumped out at me, has more than doubled during that same time. Not only is he wrong, he's hurting people, particularly children, with his policies. Marie.
Well, he's actually passed legislation to help reduce child poverty, which most Republicans voted against. So we have to be honest about the facts here. You can find lots of facts and figures on both sides here. Wages are outpacing inflation. We have the lowest inflation rate among the G7.
Can we stay with the children for just a second, though? Because they can't get jobs. So the wages don't matter to the children who are now doubled numbers from what they were in poverty.
So the person, the blonde there, that's Marie Harf. She is, again, one of the only sane voices on the Fox propaganda network. But Harris Faulkner is so dishonest here. She's blaming President Biden for the fact that child poverty doubled, when in fact, it was because of President Biden's enhanced child tax credit as part of the American Rescue Plan that child poverty was cut in half to begin with. And that was voted on a party line basis. No Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan, which enhanced the child tax credit, which cut child poverty in half. Democrats should get all of the credit. And then in terms of the blame for it expiring and effectively doubling child poverty, then Republicans should get 99% of the blame. I'll give you 1% for Joe Manchin. He's a member of our party. But it's because of Republicans. And yet the biggest news network on the planet, News Network, is blaming Joe Biden for it. That's how disingenuous and despicable the right wing is in this country. But having emphasized that, I want to take it back to, again, Chuck Grassley's objection that, hey, listen, we can't help President Biden in an election year mailing out checks before the election that could be really beneficial for the opposing team. We can't do that. So with that in mind, I want to remind you of something Donald Trump did when he was president. The CARES Act, the first major COVID-era stimulus relief. That happened in an election year when Donald Trump was president, when Democrats were desperate to get this guy out of office. But you know what happened? Democrats voted in favor of a robust stimulus package, which Donald Trump would get the credit for. They knew it because he's the sitting president. He's probably going to get the blame for all the bad stuff and credit for all the good stuff. This is good stuff. They could have hurt him during an election year by opposing this bill and help tanking it, knowing that he would probably get the lion's share of the blame. But instead, you know what they did? They acted in good faith for the American people, including conservatives, including Republicans, even if it meant allowing Donald Trump to get credit for something huge during an election year. They voted in favor of this. But here's where it gets even funnier. Think of mailing checks, and I want you to this is a clip from the CARES era of the CARES Act, and this is Steve Mnuchin, Donald Trump's Secretary of the Treasury, being interviewed by Jake Tapper. I want you to remember what Trump did when those checks went out during an election year.
First time ever, President Trump's name is going to appear on an IRS check. It's being put in the memo line because the president isn't authorized to sign the checks. Did the president personally suggest this idea?
Well, let me just correct you and say the checks have not gone out yet. And the reason why the checks have not gone out is we're hoping that more people, as I said, will go to irs.gov. It's much safer to send out direct deposits. As it relates to the president's name on it, the president could have been authorized to sign the checks. That would have slowed things down. We didn't want to do that. We did put the president's name on the check. That was my idea. He is the president, and I think it's a terrific symbol to the American public.
So during an election year, Democrats voted overwhelmingly to support a bill that would benefit the American people, but politically benefit a president of the opposing party in an election year. And he actually put his names on the checks that went to the American people. And despite all of that, Chuck Grassley and other Republicans are signaling that they won't do that here. They won't support a bill that will reduce child poverty because Joe Biden, a Democrat, is president during an election year, and we don't want him to get any credit or any benefit electorally. Folks, this is why I repeatedly insist that no matter what the Democratic Party's faults are, and there are faults in the Democratic Party, and they are many, the Democratic Party is simply the better party. Elected Democrats are just better people with better ideas, better policy, better ethics, and a better commitment to the American people, including in red states, conservative voters, than the Republican Party. This is the 10 billionth exhibit, which demonstrates the fundamental, meaningful distinctions between the two parties and why a vote for Republicans, unless you're a millionaire or billionaire, is entirely irrational and unjustified. Republicans will resist cutting child poverty down because it will benefit a politician of the opposing party. That is despicable, it's indefensible, and quite frankly, Democrats would be considerably less likely to do this if they would do it at all, which probably not based on past behavior. And that's why, as we get closer into the election, I urge you to vote blue, no matter where you are. Vote blue in the election and kick these people out of office. They don't deserve your vote. Vote Democrat. Let me know what you think in the comments.